Viore. It's a name that sounds Italian, but is probably actually about as Italian as the Plymouth Volare was. It's a little LCD TV I picked up at the thrift store for $7.99. And for a 13-inch TV, this thing is super lightweight. You can easily pick it up and carry it around in one hand. I've been looking for a little LCD TV like this ever since that Kobe TV I did a video about a while back died on me. Its backlight went out, so I ended up junking it. But luckily this one does work. I briefly tested it at the thrift store. I did not get it with the remote control, but I did get the original power supply, which is also super lightweight and actually rattles when you knock on it. But it has a full set of controls on the top, so you can get by without the remote. It's Viore model number LC13VH54, and if you try to look that up, you'll find absolutely no information about this TV, not even a copy of the owner's manual. The only thing you'll see are various vendors trying to sell you the circuit board for it, which may indicate most of these have also ended up on the scrap heap, but at least this one has survived. It was manufactured in January 2011 in China. But what really attracted me to this TV, besides its small size and bargain price, was the vast array of inputs it has on the side. We get an RF input, and because this is from 2011, that means it has both analog and digital TV tuners. It says earphone, but I'm guessing since this is a stereo TV, this is a stereo headphone output, so it really should say earphones instead of singular. Next to that are the stereo left and right audio inputs and the composite video input, S-video input, component video input, VGA input, PC audio input, HDMI input, and the DC input for the power supply, and a USB port curiously marked service. So this little TV really does do it all, and it runs on 12 volts DC, making it easy to power on an RV or boat. And as I turn it on, you may notice something unusual about it, and that is its aspect ratio. It's obviously not a 4:3 display, but it's also not quite fully widescreen. That's because this is actually a 16:10 aspect ratio display. It is a 13.3-inch 1280 by 800 resolution LCD panel. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it's exactly the same as found on many laptop computers like this 2007 MacBook. But when I connect it to an antenna and use it to display local digital TV broadcasts, that's where you start to get the impression that this TV is a jack of all trades, master of none, because it makes no attempt to correct for the different aspect ratio of that 16:10 display, so any 16:9 programming, such as what you're seeing now, just gets vertically stretched to fill the screen. It's not as bad as seeing widescreen video horizontally squished to fit a 4:3 display, but it definitely is noticeable. You can see it in the logo of the Home Shopping Network, which is supposed to be a circle, but comes out looking more like an oval. And if you're thinking there must be some option in the menu to fix that, it does have options for screen size, including full, which just stretches it out to fit the full screen, which is what we're already using, normal, which looks exactly the same, water glass, which is slightly cropped at the edges. You can see that logo's all the way at the edge now. Cinema, which crops it even more. We're missing all that text at the bottom. And back to full. It does have another option here for auto wide, but I think that's just for displaying 4:3 content. It controls whether you want it stretch it out to fit the widescreen or not, so that has no effect on 16:9 video. Actually, that cinema mode is for when you're displaying widescreen video that has been letterboxed into 4:3. Then that crops and zooms it out to fill the entire screen.
Then why don't you wrap up the biggest color TV set you have and send it to Bonnie Tucker in Salina, Farm Road 6. While you're at it, throw in a big tip for the delivery boys.
He likes to give a big tip to all the delivery boys.
And indeed, when you have that auto-wide feature enabled and you're displaying a 4:3 video source, such as a VHS tape, it does not attempt to stretch it out to fit the display. So at least that much is good. And I noticed on this information display on the corner, it specifically says 480i 60 Hz, so I'm pretty sure this also supports PAL. And indeed it does. It says 576i 50 Hz when displaying a PAL video signal, and we're getting a full color image. And it supports progressive scan video through the component video input. The display changes from 480i to 480p when I enable it. You can also use the green plug of the component video input as a high-resolution monochrome display for a computer like an Apple II. Here you should be able to see the difference between using the composite input to display monochrome video and using the green plug of the component input to display monochrome video. It's not a massive difference, but it definitely is noticeably sharper. And with an adapter like this, you can use it as a Luma Chroma display for a computer like a Commodore 64 or Atari 800 through the S-video input. So it's a very versatile display for a vintage computing enthusiast like myself, if the input lag isn't too bad. So let's test that. Using Jim Lender's excellent CJ compatibility tester program and the slow motion recording mode of this Handycam, I was able to determine that this LCD TV is 4 frames behind the Tandy's CRT monitor. That's not as bad as some TVs I've seen which are up to 10 frames behind a CRT, but it definitely is noticeable. And unlike some TVs which have a game mode, which reduces lag at the expense of image quality, this one does not. So that lag definitely could be an issue when playing games. It would affect your reaction time. Philips Universal Remote to the rescue. Even though they're a Dutch brand and not Italian, they actually do have Viore in their code list, and it works perfectly.
Perovskite solar cells are lighter and more flexible than conventional silicon-based devices.
And as expected, when using it as a computer monitor through the VGA input, it looks perfectly fine, and it has a native resolution of 1280 by 800. And by the way, I'm editing this video using Sony Picture Motion Browser, so if it looks a bit crude, that's why. Unfortunately, when using the VGA input with a vintage PC, there is no option to not stretch out the display to fit the full screen, so anything that's 4:3 is going to be horizontally stretched. The only option you get besides full, which stretches it out to fit the full screen, is dot by dot, which displays it pixel accurate, but at a lower resolution like this, you get a quite comically large border around it. Unfortunately, it does not support video signals which have a scan rate lower than VGA, such as from an Amiga, an Atari ST, an Apple II GS, or in this case a Tandy 1000RL, which is switchable between CGA and MDA. In either case, all I get is a message on the screen that says unsupport. But if you do have one of these computers, you can get a circuit board like this which converts the computer's RGB video output to component video, which will look virtually indistinguishable because you still have 3 separate signals going into the display. They're just arranged differently. And that's actually better than using the VGA input because the component input lets you switch it to 4:3 while the VGA input does not. And likewise, the HDMI input works fine and supports up to 1080p 60, even though this isn't actually displaying that resolution. So especially if you're a fan of vintage computers and video game consoles, I think it's very handy to have a cheap little TV like this, which was made in that transitional period in the late 2000s and early 2010s, when people were moving from analog to digital, and standard definition to high definition, and as a result it was designed to support a wide variety of different video formats. These days I know there are devices to convert just about anything to HDMI, and they are getting better, but it's still very handy to have all the inputs you need built into the TV.